The veterinarian rescues a street dog, not knowing he belongs to the richest investor in the country. Before we begin the story, a special welcome to all of our new subscribers. We are so grateful to have you as part of our impressive narratives community. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Julian Croft didn't have friends. He had assets. He didn't have conversations. He had transactions. His entire life was a meticulously managed portfolio, and love, in his expert opinion, was the most volatile and irrational stock on the market, a penny stock for fools. From his sterile, glass-walled penthouse that overlooked the entirety of Chicago, he managed a private equity firm so powerful it could make or break industries with a single whispered command. His world was one of numbers, of calculated risks, and of a profound self-imposed solitude. There was only one exception to his ironclad rule of emotional detachment, a scruffy, one-eared terrier mix named Winston. Winston was not an asset. Winston was the only living creature on the planet that Julian genuinely trusted. He had found the dog years ago, abandoned and shivering in an alley behind his first much smaller office. He had taken him in, not out of compassion, a word he distrusted, but out of a strange sense of recognizing a fellow survivor. Winston, like him, was a creature who had learned that the world was a hard place, and that loyalty was a rare and precious commodity. In the suffocating silence of the penthouse, Winston was the only heartbeat besides his own. He was the one being who didn't want his money, who didn't care about his influence, who was simply, unequivocally there. Julian would spend his evenings not in fancy restaurants but on the floor of his living room, throwing a worn-out tennis ball for the scruffy terrier, the dog's happy panting the only sound that made the vast empty space feel like a home. Across town, in a small, slightly chaotic clinic in a neighborhood that the city's glossy magazines never featured, Dr. Amelia Russo, Mia to everyone who knew her, was fighting a different kind of battle. The Maple Street Animal Clinic was her life's dream, and her life's greatest struggle. It was a place held together by duct tape, hope, and an overwhelming amount of love. The paint was peeling, the equipment was secondhand, and the bills were always due. Mia was a whirlwind of compassionate energy. She was the kind of vet who would sit on the floor for an hour to coax a terrified kitten out from under a chair, who knew the names of not just every pet, but every pet's owner, and who had a creative financing plan for anyone who couldn't afford a crucial surgery. Her clinic was a sanctuary for the neighborhood's strays, both four-legged and two-legged. "You can't save them all, Mia," her part-time receptionist, an elderly, no-nonsense woman named Carol, would tell her at least once a week, usually as Mia was trying to figure out how to house another abandoned puppy. "I know," Mia would always reply, her brow furrowed with worry as she looked at her dwindling supplies. "But I have to try to save this one." Her life was a world away from Julian Croft's. His world was about calculated gains. Hers was about managing compassionate losses. He saw the world in black and white. She saw it in 1,000 shades of muddy paw prints and trusting, furry faces. Their two worlds were on a collision course, and the catalyst was a clap of thunder. The storm hit Chicago without warning. A sudden, violent squall that turned the sky a bruised purple and unleashed a torrent of rain. Julian was in his home office, finalizing a multi-billion-dollar deal, the storm a distant, irrelevant noise. He had let Winston out onto the secure, high-walled terrace for a few minutes. In his intense focus on the numbers on his screen, he had forgotten to close the small service gate that the building's maintenance crew sometimes used. When he finally looked up from his work an hour later, the rain was lashing against the windows. He called for Winston. There was no answering jingle of his caller. A cold, unfamiliar feeling, panic, began to creep up Julian's spine. He rushed to the terrace. The service gate was slightly ajar, swinging in the wind. Winston was gone. Julian's controlled world shattered. He tore through the penthouse, his heart pounding in his ears. He called his head of security, his voice sharp with a terror he hadn't felt in years. "Find him," was all he could manage to say. For the next 2 hours, Julian was a ghost in his own home, pacing the cold floors, staring out at the rain-swept city, the silence of the apartment now a monstrous, deafening void. Winston was chipped, of course. Everything in Julian's life was tracked and optimized. But in a storm this bad, the signal was weak, intermittent. His security team was searching, but the city was vast, and Winston was a small, scared dog in a very big, very dangerous world. Miles away, Mia Russo was driving her beat-up old Jeep, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. She was on her way home after a long, exhausting day, her last surgery a complicated procedure on a golden retriever who had eaten an entire box of Christmas ornaments. She was tired, she was broke, and all she wanted was a hot shower and a bowl of cheap ramen. As she turned down a quiet side street, her headlights cut through the rain and illuminated a small, shivering bundle of fur huddled under a bus stop bench. "Oh no," she whispered, pulling the Jeep over to the curb. She grabbed a thick blanket from her back seat and rushed out into the storm. The dog was a scruffy terrier mix, soaked to the bone, trembling with cold and fear. He had a nasty gash on his front leg, probably from a piece of broken glass. When she approached, he let out a low, warning growl. "Hey, buddy," she said, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm here to help." She didn't try to grab him. She just knelt down on the wet pavement, a few feet away, and held out her hand, letting him get used to her scent. She spoke to him in a low, calming tone, telling him about her day, about the silly golden retriever, about how much she hated driving in the rain. Slowly, the growling subsided, replaced by a low whimper. She saw the collar then, a simple leather one, but the tag was missing, probably torn off in his escape. He was clearly someone's pet, not a lifelong stray. He was just lost. And hurt. "Okay, pal," she said softly. "Let's get you warm." She gently wrapped the blanket around him. He flinched, but he didn't resist. She carefully lifted him into her arms. He was heavier than he looked, and carried him back to her Jeep. She placed him on the passenger seat, cranked up the heat, and drove not towards her apartment, but back towards the one place she knew he would be safe. Her clinic. For the next hour, under the warm, fluorescent lights of the Maple Street Animal Clinic, Mia became a whirlwind of gentle efficiency. She cleaned and stitched the gash on his leg, her movements precise and comforting. She gave him a shot for the pain and a mild sedative to calm his nerves. She dried his matted fur with a warm towel until he was a fluffy, slightly dazed-looking ball of brown and white. She scanned him for a microchip, but her old second-hand scanner couldn't get a reading through the storm's interference. "Well, Winston," she said, finally finding his name on a small, barely legible engraving on the collar's buckle. "Looks like you're stuck with me for the night." She made him a soft bed out of old blankets in one of the kennels, gave him a bowl of warm, wet food, which he devoured in seconds, and sat with him until his frightened eyes finally closed and his breathing evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep. As she locked up the clinic for the night, her own exhaustion was a heavy weight on her shoulders. She had just spent her own money on medicine, used up her last clean sutures, and committed to caring for a dog whose owner she might never find. But as she looked at the sleeping terrier, safe and warm in his kennel, she didn't feel a single ounce of regret. It was just what you did. You saw a creature in need, and you helped. It was as simple and as complicated as that. The next morning, Julian's security team finally got a solid, sustained signal from Winston's microchip. The location was a small, unassuming building in a neighborhood he rarely drove through. The Maple Street Animal Clinic. Relief washed over him, so powerful it almost made him dizzy. It was quickly followed by a cold, familiar wave of suspicion. A vet clinic. How convenient. Someone finds a lost dog that is clearly well cared for, a dog belonging to someone wealthy, and they just happen to take it to their own clinic. The story wrote itself. A rescue, followed by a hefty bill for emergency services, and probably a generous reward for their troubles. He had seen this play 100 times. He drove to the clinic himself, his jaw set, his mind already preparing for the transaction. He would pay them off, get his dog, and put this entire chaotic, emotional episode behind him. He strode into the small, slightly cluttered waiting room, the scent of antiseptic and animals filling the air. A young woman with bright red hair was at the front desk, wrestling with a printer. "I'm here for my dog," Julian said, his voice cold and commanding. "A terrier mix named Winston." The redhead looked up. "Oh, the little storm survivor. He's a sweetheart. Dr. Russo, is just finishing up with him. Let me get her." A minute later, a woman in blue scrubs walked out from a back room. She was wiping her hands on a towel, a tired but gentle smile on her face. Julian recognized her immediately from the security footage his team had shown him, the woman who had found his dog. "You must be Winston's owner," she said, her voice warm. "I'm Dr. Russo. I'm so glad you found us. He was in pretty rough shape last night, but he's a tough little guy. The gash on his leg is stitched up, he's had his shots, and after a good meal and a long nap, he's almost back to his old self." "Excellent," Julian said, pulling out his wallet. "Send me the bill, and let me know what the reward is for his return. I'll write you a check for both." Mia's warm smile faded, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. The reward?" "Yes," Julian said impatiently. "What's your price? I assume that's how this works. You find a lost dog, you provide services, and you expect a payout. It's a standard business model." She stared at him, her brown eyes wide with a disbelief so profound it was almost comical. She looked from his expensive watch to his condescending expression, and then a slow, dangerous fire began to build in her gaze. "My price?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. She took a step closer. "My price for leaving my warm, dry car in the middle of a thunderstorm to rescue a terrified, injured animal? My price for bringing him to my own clinic, using my own supplies, and staying with him half the night to make sure he was okay?" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Let me see. The stitches, the medicine, the food, and let's not forget the emotional labor of calming a traumatized animal. I'd say the price, Mr. Croft," he supplied, feeling a strange, unfamiliar prickle of unease. "Mr. Croft." She finished, her voice now dripping with ice. "The price is that you take your dog, you walk out of my clinic, and you take your disgusting, transactional view of the world with you. There is no bill, there is no reward, there is just a dog who needed help. Something you clearly wouldn't understand." She turned on her heel. "Winston is in the last kennel on the right. Show yourself out." She disappeared into the back room, leaving Julian standing alone in the waiting room, completely and utterly speechless. He had come here expecting a negotiation. He had come here expecting to be in control. He had never, in a million years, expected to be so thoroughly, so righteously, and so deservedly put in his place. And he had no idea what to do next. Julian Croft stood frozen in the waiting room of the Maple Street Animal Clinic for a full 30 seconds. A length of time that in his world could accommodate a hostile takeover bid and 3 firings. The scent of antiseptic and something vaguely like wet dog filled his nostrils. He felt adrift. He was a man who navigated the world through leverage, through transactions, through the clear and predictable language of money. And Dr. Amelia Russo had just taken that language, ripped it to shreds, and set it on fire with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. He walked slowly to the back, his expensive leather shoes feeling absurdly loud on the worn linoleum floor. In the last kennel, just as she'd said, was Winston. The dog's tail gave a single hesitant thump against the blanket when he saw Julian. The gash on his leg was neatly stitched and bandaged. He looked warm, safe, and surprisingly content. Julian knelt and opened the kennel door. Winston trotted out, licked his hand once, and then looked back toward the door to the inner clinic, as if waiting for someone. For her, the journey back to the penthouse was the quietest drive of Julian's life. Winston sat in the passenger seat, occasionally looking at Julian with a quizzical head tilt, as if to say, "What was that all about?" Julian didn't have an answer. He kept replaying the scene in his mind, the fire in Mia's eyes, the quiet, unshakable dignity in her voice. "Take your disgusting, transactional view of the world with you." No one had ever spoken to him like that. People feared him, respected him, or tried to flatter him. No one had ever simply dismissed him. Dismissed his entire worldview as irrelevant. Back in the sterile silence of his apartment, the feeling of dislocation only intensified. He tried to work, to lose himself in the familiar comfort of numbers and projections. But the numbers seemed flat, meaningless. He found himself staring out at the city, a landscape he had always seen as a chessboard to be conquered, and for the first time, he wondered about the lives being lived in all those tiny, glittering lights. Were they all just transactions? Or was there something else, something he had completely missed? He found the clinic's website online. It was a simple, slightly amateurish site, clearly designed by Mia herself. The About Us page had a photo of her, smiling, a large golden retriever's head resting on her shoulder. The text was simple and direct. At Maple Street Animal Clinic, we believe every animal deserves a chance. We work with every budget to provide the best possible care, because a community is only as strong as its most vulnerable members. It was a mission statement so devoid of corporate jargon, so full of pure, simple sincerity, that it felt like a document from another planet. He clicked on the donate button. He was about to make a large, anonymous donation, his usual method of dealing with feelings he didn't understand. But he stopped. He remembered her face. There is no reward. Throwing money at this wouldn't fix it. It would only prove her right. He closed the laptop with a frustrated sigh. For the first time in his life, he had a problem that money couldn't solve. And it was driving him insane. Mia, for her part, tried to put the encounter with the arrogant billionaire out of her mind. She had more pressing concerns. The clinic's ancient X-ray machine had finally given up the ghost that morning, sparking and dying with a sad final wheeze. A new one, even a used, refurbished one, would cost thousands of dollars she didn't have. "We can't keep operating without it, Mia," Carol, her receptionist, said, looking at the clinic's dismal bank balance. "We'll have to refer all our emergency cases to the big downtown hospital. Most of our clients can't afford that." "I know," Mia said, rubbing her temples. "I'll figure something out. I always do." Her figuring something out involved a series of increasingly desperate measures. She called the bank to apply for a small business loan and was politely but firmly rejected. She started a GoFundMe page, which raised a grand total of $75, mostly from her own grandmother. She even considered selling her beat-up old Jeep, her only mode of transportation, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. She was in the middle of this stressful financial juggling act a week later when a sleek black town car pulled up in front of the clinic. A man in a sharp suit got out. Mia's heart sank. She assumed it was a debt collector or a lawyer from the bank, coming to deliver the final blow. The man walked in, his eyes scanning the small, slightly shabby waiting room. He looked profoundly out of place. It was Julian Croft. "Dr. Russo," he said, his voice quiet, formal. "Mr. Croft," she replied, her own voice cool, guarded. "If you're here to complain about the quality of our free services, the line is over there." She gestured to the empty room. He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "No, I'm not here to complain. I'm here to ask a question." "I'm a vet," she said flatly. "Unless your question is about why your goldfish looks sad, I'm probably not the right person to ask." He ignored her sarcasm. "Winston," he began. "He's been different since he came back." This caught her off guard. "Different how?" she asked, her professional curiosity overriding her personal animosity. "He's listless. He's not eating much. He just lies around, staring at the door," Julian explained. "I had my personal vet check him over. Physically, he's fine. The wound is healing perfectly, but his behavior, it's like he's depressed." Mia crossed her arms, a clinical frown on her face. "How long has this been going on?" "Since he got back. A week now." "Any changes in his routine? His environment?" "No, everything is exactly the same," Julian insisted. Mia sighed. "Mr. Croft, sometimes after a traumatic event, like getting lost in a storm and being injured, animals can experience a form of PTSD. They can also form a strong, sudden attachment to their rescuer. It's a kind of transference. They associate that person with safety. He's not just missing his old routine. He might be missing me." The words hung in the air between them. The idea was both professionally logical and personally mortifying. Julian seemed to be having a similar internal crisis. "So what you're saying is," he said slowly, "my dog is depressed because you're not there?" "It's a possibility," she said, trying to sound as detached as possible. "The best thing would be for him to see me again, to understand that he's safe with you and that I'm okay. It would give him closure." Julian was silent for a long moment, the gears in his hyperlogical brain clearly turning. "So you would need to come to my home," he stated. "Just for a visit, to interact with him in his own environment," she clarified quickly. "It's a standard behavioral therapy technique. I can pencil you in for a home visit. My rate is $60 an hour plus travel." She couldn't resist the small dig. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't arrogance or condescension. It was a raw, unfiltered desperation. "Name your price," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Any price." She saw her opening. The broken X-ray machine, the looming bills, the GoFundMe page. She could ask for thousands. He wouldn't even blink. It would solve all her problems. It would be a transaction, just like he wanted. But as she looked at the desperate man in front of her, she thought of the lonely, scared dog. And she thought of the promise she had made on her own website. "We work with every budget." $60 an hour is fine, Mr. Croft, she said, her voice firm. "I'm a vet, not an opportunist. When is a good time for you?" He looked at her, completely taken aback. He had offered her a blank check, and she had countered with her standard rate. She was, he was beginning to realize, the most infuriatingly, admirably principled person he had ever met. "Tonight," he said, "come for dinner. That way you can observe him for a longer period." "Dinner?" she asked, her suspicion returning. "Is that a standard behavioral therapy technique too?" "No," he said, a flicker of something that might have been a smile on his lips. "It's a desperate attempt by a man who is willing to do anything to make his dog happy again, and who also happens to have a private chef who makes a surprisingly good salmon." She studied him, a war raging in her mind. It was a terrible idea. It was unprofessional. It was a trap. But then she thought of Winston, the sad, scruffy terrier. "Fine," she sighed, "but I'm bringing my own salad dressing. I don't trust a man who thinks love is a penny stock to have good taste in vinaigrette." Walking into Julian's penthouse for the second time was a completely different experience. The first time he had been a cold, arrogant stranger. Now he was something else. A client. A puzzle. A man who had looked at her with a desperation she couldn't ignore. The apartment was just as she remembered. Vast, white, and silent as a tomb. But this time, a small, furry, and very unhappy-looking terrier was lying listlessly on an expensive-looking rug. "Winston," Mia called, her voice immediately warm and cheerful. The dog's head shot up, his one good ear perked. He stared at her for a second, as if not believing his eyes, and then he let out a series of joyful, high-pitched yelps and bolted towards her, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. He jumped into her arms, licking her face with an enthusiasm that was completely at odds with his recent depression. Julian stood in the doorway, watching the reunion with a mixture of relief and a feeling he couldn't quite identify. It was a strange, sharp pang in his chest. It might have been envy. "Well," Mia said, laughing as she scratched Winston behind his ears, "I think it's safe to say he missed me." "It would appear so," Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. The evening was a surreal exercise in professional intimacy. Mia played with Winston on the floor, throwing his favorite tennis ball, while Julian sat on a nearby sofa, pretending to read a financial report but watching her every move. The chef served a magnificent salmon dinner at the vast dining table, and they ate in a silence that was punctuated by Winston's happy sighs as he lay at Mia's feet. "So what's the professional diagnosis, doctor?" Julian asked as they were having coffee. "He's a classic case," Mia said, sipping her espresso. "He experienced trauma. You weren't there. I was. He formed a temporary but intense attachment. Now that he sees us together in his safe space, his brain can start to rewire that connection. He needs to see that you are his primary source of safety and that I'm just a friendly but temporary part of his world." "And how do we do that?" "We spend time together," she said simply. "All three of us. Walks in the park. Playing on the floor. You need to re-establish your bond with him, and he needs to see that I'm not a threat to that bond." She looked at him, her expression professional, but her eyes held a hint of a challenge. "It will require you to be present, to get on the floor, to throw the ball." He looked at the tennis ball, which was now covered in a significant amount of dog slobber, with a look of deep suspicion. "I can do that," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. The plan was for her to make a series of these therapy visits over the next week. It was a perfect professional arrangement. But as she was getting ready to leave that night, a new complication arose. "My car won't start," she said, coming back inside after a frustrating 10 minutes in the guest parking. "The engine is making a sound like a dying whale." Julian, ever the problem solver, immediately offered a solution. "I'll have my driver take you home." "No, that's okay," she said. I can take the bus, it's not. She stopped, a wave of dizziness washing over her. The long day, the emotional stress, the lack of a real meal, it was all catching up with her. She swayed slightly, putting a hand on the wall to steady herself. "You're not taking the bus," Julian said, his voice suddenly firm. He stepped forward, his hand hovering near her elbow, not touching, but ready to catch her. "You're exhausted. You're staying here tonight, in the guest suite." "I can't," she protested weakly. "It's unprofessional. I'm more concerned with you collapsing on a street corner than I am with professional decorum right now," he said. "And besides," he added, a flicker of his old transactional self returning, "think of it as part of the therapy, total immersion, for the dog." She was too tired to argue. "Fine," she said, "but just for tonight, and I'm billing you for the overtime." As he showed her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, a room with its own balcony and a bathroom that looked like a spa, he felt that strange, sharp pang in his chest again. He was getting everything he wanted. She was here, in his home, helping his dog. It was a perfect, logical solution to his problem. So why did it feel like he had just invited a beautiful, chaotic, and utterly unpredictable hurricane to stay the night in his perfectly ordered house? Waking up in Julian Croft's guest suite was a profoundly disorienting experience for Mia. The bed was a cloud of high thread count Egyptian cotton. The morning light filtered in through automated blinds that rose with the softest of whispers, and the silence was so absolute it felt unnatural. She was used to waking up to the sound of barking dogs, the rumble of the city bus, and the frantic beeping of her ancient coffee machine. This felt less like a bedroom and more like a luxury sensory deprivation chamber. She found a set of new, simple clothes, a soft gray sweater and comfortable black pants, laid out for her, along with a note in Julian's sharp, decisive handwriting. "My assistant estimated your size. I hope this is acceptable. Coffee is in the kitchen. Winston is waiting." The transactional nature of the note, the fact that he'd had his assistant estimate her size rather than asking, was a familiar sting. She reminded herself of her own words. This is a professional visit. She was here as a doctor, a consultant. Nothing more. She walked into the main living area to a scene that was both bizarre and unexpectedly touching. Julian, in a perfectly pressed suit, was on the floor. He was awkwardly throwing Winston's slobber-covered tennis ball, his movements stiff and unnatural, as if he were performing a complex and unpleasant physics experiment. Winston, for his part, would retrieve the ball, drop it a few feet away from Julian, and then look expectantly towards the hallway, clearly waiting for Mia. "Good morning," Mia said, trying to suppress a smile. "Having fun?" Julian immediately stood up, brushing imaginary dust from his trousers. "I am engaging in the prescribed therapeutic activity," he stated, his voice all business. The patient, seems to be responding, but his focus remains divided. "That's because you're throwing the ball like you're filing a tax return," Mia said, unable to help herself. "There's no joy in it. You have to commit to the throw. Put some soul into it." She walked over, took the ball from his hand, and with a cheerful, "Go get it, boy," she threw it in a high, perfect arc across the room. Winston, yelping with delight, tore after it. Julian watched her, a strange expression on his face. "Joy, soul, these are not concepts I typically apply to my morning routine." "Then you've been having the wrong morning routine," she said, before heading to the kitchen to find the promised coffee. The day settled into a strange rhythm. Julian had cleared his morning schedule. A move that Mia knew from the frantic emails she could see on his tablet had probably caused a series of minor meltdowns in his company. They worked on Winston's therapy together. Mia taught Julian how to play tug-of-war with a rope toy, a game he initially approached with the enthusiasm of someone being audited. "You have to let him win sometimes," she explained, as Julian stubbornly refused to yield the rope to the growling, happy terrier. "It builds his confidence. It shows him that you're a partner in the game, not just an opponent." The words seemed to land with a weight she hadn't intended. He looked at her, then at the dog, and then he let the rope go. Winston trotted away triumphantly, and Julian looked at Mia with a new, thoughtful expression. "A partner, not an opponent," he repeated softly, as if the concept was a foreign one he was trying to translate. In the afternoon, Julian had to take a series of conference calls. Mia retreated to the guest suite, intending to work on her own clinic's desperate financial situation. She was sketching out a budget, the numbers a bleak, unforgiving landscape, when there was a soft knock on the door. It was Julian. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, holding a tray with a simple lunch, a sandwich and a salad. "My chef is off today. I made this myself." She stared at the sandwich. It was a little clumsy, the bread slightly squashed, but it was the most thoughtful gesture he had made yet. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched. He lingered in the doorway. "What are you working on?" he asked, nodding towards the papers on her desk. "Just clinic business," she said, quickly covering the overdue bills with a notebook. "Is everything all right?" he asked. The question was casual, but his eyes were sharp, observant. "Everything's fine," she lied, forcing a smile. The last thing she wanted was his pity, or worse, his charity. She had seen how he solved problems, with money, with control. Her clinic's problems were hers to solve, with her own two hands. The one night in the guest suite, under the guise of Winston's continued need for observation, stretched into 2 and then 3. Mia's car, as it turned out, needed a rare part that had to be special ordered, a process that, according to Julian's mechanic, could take several days. Mia was deeply suspicious of the timing, but she had no proof and no other options. So, she stayed, and the fortress of Julian Croft began to show its cracks. She discovered that his perfectly ordered house was, in fact, profoundly lonely. There were no family photos, no personal mementos, nothing to suggest a life lived. Only a life managed. She found that he ate the same thing for dinner every night, grilled chicken and steamed vegetables, a meal chosen not for pleasure, but for optimal nutritional efficiency. She started to make small, rebellious changes. One evening, she cooked. She filled the sterile, stainless steel kitchen with the warm, chaotic smells of garlic, tomatoes, and basil, making a simple pasta dish from a recipe her grandmother had taught her. Julian came into the kitchen, drawn by the unfamiliar, wonderful aroma. "What is this?" he asked, looking at the bubbling pot on his stove as if it were an alien artifact. "It's called dinner," she said with a grin. "It's a meal people eat for pleasure, a novel concept, I know." He sat down at the kitchen island, a place he usually only passed through, and he ate. He didn't just eat, he savored. He closed his eyes as he tasted the sauce. "This is," he started, struggling for a word. "This is not efficient." "No," she said, her heart doing a little flutter. "It's just good." They talked that night. Really talked, for the first time, without the pretense of a dog's therapy or a business transaction. He asked her about her clinic, and she found herself telling him everything. The struggle, the joy, the constant, gnawing fear of not being able to make rent. He listened, not with the detached air of a CEO analyzing a failing business, but with a genuine, focused interest. "Why do you do it?" he asked. "Why put yourself through all that for so little financial return?" "Because it's not about the return," she said, looking him in the eye. "It's about the work. It's about Mrs. Gable's asthmatic cat, and the little boy who brings in his hamster every week just to make sure he's okay, and the lost, scared dogs like Winston who have nowhere else to go. It's about being a part of a community. That's a kind of wealth you can't put on a balance sheet." He was silent for a long time, just looking at her. "You," he said finally, his voice full of a quiet awe, "are a terrible businesswoman." "I know," she said, smiling. "Thank you." The next evening, he surprised her. He came home early from work and walked into the kitchen where she was preparing to make another simple meal. "My turn," he said, taking the knife from her hand. "You cook?" she asked, her eyebrows shooting up. "I used to," he said, a nostalgic look on his face. "A long time ago." He cooked for her, a simple, perfectly executed omelet, a dish he said his mother used to make for him when he was a boy. As they ate, sitting again at the small kitchen island that was quickly becoming their space, he told her about his mother. He spoke of her warmth, her laughter, her love for gardening, her quiet frustration with his father's cold, ambitious world. It was the first time he had ever spoken of her to anyone but a therapist. "I think," he said, his voice a low, vulnerable whisper, "that I've spent my whole life trying to be my father because I was terrified of being my mother." "Why?" Mia asked gently. "Because she was soft," he said. "She was kind, and the world broke her." He looked at Mia, and his eyes were filled with a deep, profound sadness. "I didn't want to be broken." In that moment, Mia saw him. Not the billionaire, not the arrogant client, but the lonely, motherless boy who had built a fortress around his heart to keep the world out. Her own heart ached for him. She reached out, her hand covering his on the cool marble of the counter. It was a simple, instinctive gesture of comfort. He flinched, not because he didn't want the touch, but because he didn't know what to do with it. He looked down at her small, capable hand on his, and then up at her face. Her eyes were full of a deep, compassionate understanding that he had never seen before. "You're not going to break, Julian," she whispered. The use of his first name, the simple, intimate word, was more powerful than any kiss. He just looked at her, his carefully constructed world falling away, leaving him feeling raw, exposed, and for the first time in a very long time, not entirely alone. The spell was broken by the sharp, insistent ringing of Mia's phone. She pulled her hand back, her face flushing as she fumbled for the phone in her pocket. It was Carol, her receptionist. "Mia, you need to get down here." Carol's voice was frantic. "It's the X-ray machine. It finally died. For real this time." "And Mrs. Gable's cat Patches, he swallowed a sewing needle. We need to see where it is, but we can't. I don't know what to do." The color drained from Mia's face. She stood up, her mind already racing. "Okay, Carol, stay calm. I'm on my way." She hung up and looked at Julian, her own personal drama forgotten, her professional instincts taking over completely. "I have to go," she said, already moving towards the door. "It's an emergency." "I'll take you," he said, standing up immediately, no questions asked. As they rushed to his car, Mia was all business, giving instructions to Carol over the phone. "Prep him for surgery, get the anesthesia ready, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Julian drove, his hands tight on the wheel, watching her. He had seen her as a compassionate caregiver, as a stubborn and principled woman, as a surprisingly good cook. But now he was seeing her as a doctor, a leader, a woman in command, and the sight was nothing short of breathtaking. He had thought he was letting us stray into his perfectly ordered life. He was beginning to realize that she was the one with the real strength, the real purpose, and he was just the man, lucky enough to be caught in her orbit. The Maple Street Animal Clinic at night was a world away from Julian Croft's silent, orderly penthouse. It was a chaotic symphony of controlled urgency. The lights were a harsh, clinical white. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, and the quiet was punctuated by the anxious whimpering of animals in the recovery kennels and the frantic hushed tones of Mia and her small, dedicated team. Julian had insisted on coming inside. He told himself it was to make sure Mia was all right. But the truth was, he couldn't have stayed in the car. He needed to see this. He needed to understand this part of her life, the part she had so carefully shielded from him. He stood in a corner of the small, cluttered waiting room, feeling like a visitor from another planet, watching as Mia transformed. The hesitant, slightly flustered woman from his kitchen was gone. In her place was Dr. Amelia Russo, a commander in her element. She moved with a speed and a certainty that was mesmerizing. Her scrubs were a little faded, her sneakers were worn, but she wore an aura of authority that was more potent than any designer suit. "Carol, get me Patches's full medical history. I need to know about any pre-existing conditions," she commanded, scrubbing her hands with a practiced efficiency. "And someone call Mrs. Gable and keep her updated. Tell her he's in the best possible hands." Julian watched as they brought the small, wheezing cat into the operating room. Through the small window in the door, he saw Mia lean over the cat, her face a mask of intense concentration. She was a surgeon, a leader, a beacon of calm in the middle of a storm. He had seen CEOs command boardrooms with less authority. He spent the next 2 hours in that waiting room, a space that was the complete antithesis of his own life. The chairs were mismatched and slightly torn. The magazines on the coffee table were years out of date. On a corkboard, a chaotic collage of photos was tacked up. A smiling pit bull in a party hat, a three-legged cat napping in a sunbeam, a handwritten thank you note from a child, decorated with crayon drawings of his hamster. It was a gallery of small, saved lives. Carol, the no-nonsense receptionist, would come out occasionally to give him updates, her initial suspicion of him replaced by a grudging respect. "She's got the needle," she announced after the first hour. "It was lodged near his esophagus. Tricky procedure. But if anyone can do it, it's Mia." While he waited, an elderly woman came in, her face etched with worry, carrying a small, trembling chihuahua. "It's Chico," the woman said, her voice shaking. "He's not breathing right." Carol immediately ushered her in, and a few minutes later, Julian heard Mia's calm, reassuring voice from the back, talking the woman through the procedure, explaining what an oxygen tent was, her tone a perfect blend of professional authority and deep human empathy. He was surrounded by a world he never knew existed, a world of fear, of love, of life and death, all playing out in a small, underfunded clinic in a forgotten corner of the city. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had spent the day moving billions of dollars from one account to another, and he felt a profound sense of uselessness. What had he actually built today? What had he saved? Finally, just after midnight, the door to the operating room opened. Mia walked out, pulling off her surgical mask. She looked utterly exhausted, but her eyes were shining with a triumphant light. "He's going to be fine," she said, a tired smile on her face. "The needle is out, he's stable. He'll need to stay for a few days for observation, but the little guy is a fighter." Carol and the other vet tech let out a collective sigh of relief, hugging Mia. Julian just stood there, watching, feeling like an intruder on a sacred moment. After she had spoken with a tearfully grateful Mrs. Gable on the phone, Mia finally turned to Julian. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the full weight of her exhaustion was visible on her face. "You're still here," she said, surprised. "I said I would wait," he replied simply. "You didn't have to." "Yes," he said, and his voice was full of a new, raw sincerity. "I did." He looked around the small, shabby clinic, at the old equipment, the peeling paint, the overflowing kennels. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "This is what you do. This is who you are." "Yes," she said, a hint of her old defiant pride in her voice. "This is who I am." He drove her home in a comfortable silence. The city was asleep, the streets empty and slick with rain. When they pulled up in front of her apartment building, she didn't immediately get out. "The X-ray machine is broken," she said suddenly, staring out at the dark street. "It died for good last week. That's why I couldn't see exactly where the needle was. I had to do it by feel. It was risky." "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his throat tight. She finally turned to look at him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard lights. "Because it's my problem to solve, Julian, not yours." "Let me help," he said, the words a simple, direct plea. "Let me buy you a new machine, the best one on the market." She shook her head. "No." "Why not?" he asked, frustrated. "I have the money. It's nothing to me, and it would help you save more lives." "Because if you do," she said, her voice full of a painful wisdom, "then this place, my clinic, my dream, it becomes yours. It becomes another one of your assets, another one of your successful acquisitions, and I would become just another one of your employees." She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I can't do that. I won't. This place, it's the only thing that's truly mine." He understood. For the first time, he truly understood the fierce, protective independence that was at her core. It wasn't about pride, it was about identity. He had spent his life buying and controlling things. She had spent her life building something that was unbuyable. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet, full of a respect that was new and profound. "I understand." "Thank you," she whispered. She got out of the car and walked into her building, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He didn't go home. He drove to his own empty office, the glittering tower that was the symbol of his success. He stood at the window, looking out at the city, but he wasn't seeing the skyline. He was seeing the faded photographs on the corkboard in Mia's waiting room. He was seeing the face of a terrified cat and the steady, capable hands that had saved him. He had built an empire of numbers, of assets, of things that could be bought and sold. She had built an empire of kindness, of second chances, of things that were priceless. And in that moment, in the cold, silent heart of his own fortress, Julian Croft knew, with a certainty that shook him to his very soul, which empire was the real one. The next morning, Julian woke up with a plan. It was a crazy, illogical, and financially questionable plan. It was the kind of plan that his old self would have dismissed as sentimental nonsense. It was the kind of plan that Mia would love. He didn't call her. He knew she would say no. Instead, he made a series of quiet, discreet calls. 2 days later, A large, unmarked truck pulled up in front of the Maple Street Animal Clinic. Two men in work uniforms got out and started unloading a series of large, heavy crates. Mia, who was in the middle of a checkup with a very anxious parrot, came out to see what the commotion was. "Excuse me," she said to the men. "I think you have the wrong address. We didn't order anything." "This is for the Maple Street Animal Clinic," the lead workman said, checking a clipboard. "Donation. It's all anonymous." Mia stared as they carried in crate after crate. When they opened the first one, her jaw dropped. It was a state-of-the-art digital X-ray machine. The next crate contained a new surgical light. The next, a new set of stainless steel kennels. Then came boxes of medicine, of high-quality pet food, of new clean blankets. It was a fortune's worth of top-of-the-line veterinary equipment and supplies. "But who?" she stammered, completely overwhelmed. The workman just shrugged. "No name on the order, ma'am. Just a note." He handed her a small, sealed envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside there was no long, emotional letter. There was just a simple, typed message. "Every doctor deserves the best tools. Every hero deserves a fortress. This is not charity. It is an investment in a business I believe in. Consider it a loan. You can pay me back when you're the most successful veterinary clinic in Chicago. No interest. No deadline." There was no signature, but she didn't need one. She knew. She leaned against the doorframe of her clinic, surrounded by the incredible, impossible gifts, and she laughed through her tears. He had listened. He had understood. He hadn't tried to buy her or her dream. He had invested in it. He had treated her not as a damsel in distress, but as a CEO of her own small, chaotic, and incredibly valuable empire. She pulled out her phone and sent him a text. It had been days since they had spoken. "You are a sneaky, manipulative, and wonderful man." His reply came back almost instantly. "I learned from the best. Dinner tonight? My treat. At a place with checkered tablecloths and a grumpy but lovable owner." She smiled, a real, joyful smile that reached her very soul. "Deal," she typed back. "But you're buying. I have a clinic to rebuild." As she stood there, in the middle of her newly equipped clinic, she realized that the fortress around Julian Croft's heart hadn't just been breached. It had been joyfully, willingly, and completely dismantled. And in its place, he was starting to build something new. Something a whole lot more like a home. The new X-ray machine hummed with a quiet, efficient power that felt like a symbol of everything that was changing. Mia's clinic, once a place held together by sheer force of will, was transforming. The anonymous loan had not just given her better tools, it had given her breathing room, the freedom to focus on her work without the constant suffocating weight of impending financial doom. Her dinner with Julian that night was different. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by the easy, comfortable rhythm of two people who had seen the truest parts of each other and had not run away. They didn't talk about their almost kiss or the confusing feelings that had been swirling between them. They talked about their dreams. She told him about her vision for the clinic. Not just as a place to treat sick animals, but as a community hub. A place that could offer low-cost spay and neuter services, educational programs for kids, and a pet food bank for struggling families. He listened, not with the detached air of a CEO, but with the focused intensity of a partner, occasionally interrupting with a sharp, insightful question that pushed her to think bigger. "You're not just thinking like a vet," he said, a look of genuine admiration on his face. "You're thinking like a founder, like an innovator." "I'm just thinking about what the neighborhood needs," she said with a shrug. "That's what the best innovators do," he countered. "They see a need and they build a solution." In turn, he told her about his own, half-forgotten dream. Before his father had pushed him into the cold, sharp world of finance, he had wanted to be an architect. He spoke of his love for old buildings, for the stories embedded in their brick and mortar, for the way a well-designed space could shape the lives of the people within it. "I wanted to build things that lasted," he said, a note of old sadness in his voice. "Instead, I learned how to build portfolios. It's not the same. It's never too late to build something new," she said softly, echoing a sentiment he had once offered her. It was in that moment, in that noisy, family-owned restaurant, that a new, unspoken partnership was forged. It was no longer about his world or her world. It was about what they could build together. The first manifestation of this partnership was the Winston Project. It was Julian's idea, a quiet act of gratitude to the dog that had brought them together. He proposed that his firm's charitable foundation, an entity he had previously ignored, would fully fund a new wing for the city's largest, most overcrowded animal shelter. But he didn't just want to write a check. "I want you to design it," he told Mia, unrolling a set of blueprints on the floor of his penthouse. "I'll handle the finances, the construction, the logistics. But you provide the soul. I want you to design a space that's not just a shelter, but a sanctuary, the kind of place you would build." Mia was stunned. It was an offer of trust so profound it left her speechless. For the next few weeks, they became a formidable team. They spent their days at their respective jobs and their nights huddled over blueprints, their conversations a chaotic, wonderful mix of architectural jargon and veterinary science. "No, the recovery kennels can't face west," she would argue, pointing a pen at the plans. "The afternoon sun will be too harsh on the post-op animals. We need soft, indirect light." "And if we reroute the HVAC system through here," he would counter, his mind seeing the logistical puzzle, "we can create a more efficient airflow and reduce the risk of airborne illnesses." They were building something, brick by metaphorical brick, and in the process they were building a new kind of intimacy, an intimacy born of a shared purpose and a deep, mutual respect for each other's minds. He saw her brilliance, her fierce intelligence, and her unwavering compassion. She saw his hidden passion, his sharp, strategic mind, and the deep well of kindness he was finally allowing himself to access. Their relationship was no longer a secret, at least not to them. It was in the easy way they would fall into silence, both working on their own projects in the same room. It was in the way she would bring him a coffee, just how he liked it, without asking. It was in the way he would gently place a blanket over her when she fell asleep on his sofa, a stack of blueprints still in her lap. But they hadn't defined it. The words boyfriend, girlfriend, couple, they felt too small, too conventional for what was growing between them. They were partners, in the truest, deepest sense of the word. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Winston Project was a major media event. Julian, as the city's most powerful investor, was the center of attention. But when he stepped up to the podium to speak, he did something no one expected. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "But I have to be honest, I am not the real architect of this project. The vision, the heart, and the soul of what we are building here belong to someone else. Someone who taught me that the most valuable investments are not in companies, but in communities. Someone who proves every day that a single, compassionate person can change the world." He turned and looked directly at Mia, who was standing in the front row. "Please join me in welcoming the true leader of this project, Dr. Amelia Russo." He stepped back and started to applaud. The entire crowd, surprised but moved by his genuine humility, joined in. A stunned Mia walked to the stage, a blush rising on her cheeks. She hadn't prepared a speech. She just spoke from the heart. "Winston was a lost dog in a storm," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But he wasn't the only one who was lost that night. This project? It's for all the Winstons out there. The ones who are scared and hurt and just need a safe, warm place to heal. And sometimes," she said, her gaze finding Julian's in the crowd, "those Winstons aren't just the animals. They're us too." After the ceremony, as they were walking back to his car, surrounded by the buzz of reporters, he took her hand, a simple public gesture that felt like a declaration. "You were incredible," he said. "We were incredible," she corrected, squeezing his hand. That night, back at the penthouse, the last of their own walls came down. The professional pretense, the fear of defining what they were, it all dissolved. "I love you, Mia Russo," he said, his voice a raw, honest whisper as he pulled her into his arms. "In the most illogical, inefficient, and profoundly wonderful way. I love you too, Julian Croft," she replied, her heart full. "Even though you are a terrible, sentimental, and surprisingly good dog owner." Their first real kiss was not a spark, but a slow, deep burn. It was a kiss of homecoming, a recognition of two souls who had been circling each other for months and had finally found their way. Life as a real couple was a beautiful, seamless integration of their worlds. He would spend his Saturdays at her clinic, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a volunteer, awkwardly trying to clean kennels and getting covered in mud, much to the amusement of Carol, the receptionist. She would attend his stuffy corporate dinners, not as an outsider, but as his partner, charming his business associates with her sharp wit and her complete lack of interest in their stock portfolios. They were a strange and wonderful team. He was the logic, she was the soul. He was the structure, she was the story. The final piece of their new life clicked into place on a quiet Tuesday morning. Mia was at the clinic performing a routine checkup on a very large, very friendly Great Dane when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. Emergency. Penthouse. Now. Her heart dropped. She raced through the city, imagining 100 different disasters. Had Winston gotten sick? Was there a fire? She burst into the penthouse, her heart pounding. The apartment was quiet. Julian, she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. She found him in the living room. He was not in the middle of a crisis, he was on one knee. The room was filled with what looked like 1,000 candles. Winston was sitting beside him, wearing a small, slightly crooked bow tie. Julian, she breathed, completely taken aback. What is this? I thought there was an emergency. There is, he said, his voice a little shaky, but his eyes were shining with a love so profound it made her knees weak. A profound and irreversible emergency of the heart. He took a small velvet box from his pocket. Mia Russo, he began, you rescued my dog, you rescued my company, but most importantly, you rescued me. You walked into my cold, empty, transactional life and you filled it with warmth and laughter and purpose. You are the most valuable asset I have ever known, and I want to merge my life with yours permanently. He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single clear diamond. I know I'm not an easy man. I'm difficult and controlling, and I still don't entirely understand the concept of joy. But I want to learn, with you, for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? She was laughing and crying at the same time. Is this a hostile takeover? She asked, teasing him through her tears. No, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's an unconditional surrender. Then yes, she said, throwing her arms around his neck. 1,000 times yes. Winston let out a small happy bark as if to seal the deal. And in that moment, surrounded by candlelight, with a scruffy terrier as their witness, they knew that their chaotic, improbable, and utterly perfect story was just beginning. The news of Julian Croft's engagement to a neighborhood veterinarian did not just create ripples in Chicago's high society, it created a tidal wave. The city's gossip columns had a field day. Billionaire Baron trades blue chips for paw prints. One headline blared, "From strays to sterling, the vet who tamed Wall Street's wolf." Julian's world was in a state of collective shock. His business associates were bewildered. His few remaining, emotionally distant relatives were appalled. His father, had he been alive, would have likely had a full-blown aneurysm. Are you absolutely certain about this, Julian? His lead counsel, a man who had known him for 20 years, had asked, his voice laced with the cautious concern one uses when addressing a man who might be having a very public, very expensive breakdown. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Julian had replied, his voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos his decision had unleashed. Mia's world, in contrast, reacted with a mixture of disbelief, joy, and a healthy dose of protective skepticism. He's a billionaire, Mia, Carol, her receptionist, had said, her eyes wide as she stared at the simple, elegant diamond on Mia's finger. Billionaires don't marry vets from Maple Street. They have prenups thicker than phone books and emotions that are cryogenically frozen. Julian is different, Mia had tried to explain, though she knew how insane it sounded. Different how? Does his money fold itself? Mia had just laughed. No, but he's learning how to get on the floor and play with a dog. It's a start. Planning the wedding became their first official project as a newly engaged couple, and it was a perfect microcosm of their relationship, a chaotic, wonderful, and often hilarious negotiation between two completely different worlds. Julian, true to form, initially approached it like a corporate merger. He had his assistant draw up a list of potential venues: 5-star hotels, exclusive country clubs, private islands. He had a team research the top wedding planners, caterers, and florists in the country. We need a project timeline, a budget forecast, and a risk assessment analysis, he had declared one evening, unrolling a massive spreadsheet on the floor of Mia's small apartment, which had become their unofficial headquarters. Mia had looked at the spreadsheet, then at him, and had gently placed a half-eaten container of lo mein on top of it. "Honey," she had said, a word that still made his heart do a little jump. "This isn't a hostile takeover. It's a party. We don't need a risk assessment. We need a good DJ and a cake that doesn't taste like cardboard." And so began the great wedding debate. He wanted elegant, minimalist invitations on 100-pound cardstock. She wanted to design them herself, with a cartoon drawing of Winston wearing a bow tie. He wanted a string quartet playing classical music. She wanted a local salsa band that her grandmother loved. "It will be a disaster," he had argued, picturing his stuffy business associates being forced to dance the merengue. "It will be fun," she had countered, "something your world could use a little more of." In the end, they compromised. Or rather, Julian learned the art of the unconditional surrender. The wedding, they decided, would not be in a grand ballroom or on a private island. It would be at the one place that felt like both of them. The newly constructed Winston Project Animal Sanctuary, the building they had designed together. The guest list was a source of constant amusement. Mia's side consisted of her grandmother, her extended family of loud, loving aunts and uncles, the entire staff of the Maple Street Clinic, and a significant portion of the pet-owning population of her neighborhood. Julian's side consisted of a handful of business colleagues he genuinely respected, his security team, and, after much debate, his Aunt Penelope, a formidable woman who had once tried to stage an intervention over his unhealthy obsession with work. "She's going to hate me," Mia had said, picturing the stern-looking woman from the family photos. "No," Julian had replied with a grin. "She's going to adore you. You're the first person who's ever successfully staged an intervention on me without my realizing it." As the wedding planning continued, a new, more serious project began to take shape. With the Winston project nearing completion, Julian saw the incredible impact that a well-funded, compassionately designed initiative could have. He also saw the brilliance of Mia's mind, not just as a vet, but as a leader, a visionary. "Your clinic is amazing, Mia," he said one night, as they were going over the final construction plans for the shelter. "But it's one clinic. You're working yourself to the bone, constantly on the verge of financial collapse, to help a few dozen animals a week." "It's the best I can do," she said, a little defensively. "What if," he said, his eyes shining with that familiar, intense focus she had first seen in his boardroom, "you could do more? What if you could help thousands?" He laid out his idea. He wanted to create a foundation, the Russo Foundation for Animal Welfare. He would provide the initial seed funding, a significant multi-million-dollar endowment. But he didn't want to run it. He wanted her to. "You would be the founder and the director," he explained, his voice full of a passionate conviction. "You would create a network of clinics, just like yours, in underserved neighborhoods all across the country. You would fund them, you would train the staff, you would create a new model for compassionate, accessible veterinary care. You wouldn't just be saving a few animals, Mia. You would be changing the entire system." She stared at him, completely overwhelmed. It was a dream so big, so audacious, she had never even dared to imagine it for herself. "Julian, I'm a vet. I don't know how to run a national foundation." "You are a leader," he said, his voice an unbreakable promise. "You know how to see a need and build a solution. I saw you do it with a scared dog in a storm, and I saw you do it with a multi-million-dollar construction project. The principles are the same." "And you won't be alone," he added, taking her hand. "I'll be your partner, your silent partner. I'll handle the boring stuff, the investments, the legal structures, the spreadsheets. You just provide the soul." Tears welled in her eyes. It was the most incredible gift he could have ever given her, a gift of trust, of belief, and of a shared purpose that was bigger than both of them. It was his way of saying, "I don't just love you, I believe in you." "Okay," she whispered, her heart full to bursting. "Let's build something new. Together." The wedding day arrived on a perfect sunny Saturday in late spring. The Winston Project Sanctuary was a beautiful, peaceful place, a collection of low-slung modern buildings surrounded by acres of green fields and walking trails. It didn't look like a shelter. It looked like a college campus for happy animals. The ceremony was held in a sun-dappled meadow, under the shade of a massive, ancient oak tree. The guests sat on simple wooden benches. Winston, wearing a very smart, custom-made bow tie, served as the ring-bearer, trotting down the aisle with a small, velvet pouch tied to his collar. Mia was walked down the aisle by her grandmother, a proud, beaming woman who was wearing a bright, flowered dress and had already made friends with 3 of Julian's most stoic business partners. Mia herself looked breathtaking. She wore a simple, elegant dress that flowed in the gentle breeze, her hair woven with small, white wildflowers. She was barefoot. It was, she had declared, the only way she felt truly grounded. Julian waited for her under the oak tree, his heart pounding a rhythm of pure, unadulterated joy. He had never seen anything more beautiful. Their vows were not polished or perfect, they were real. "Mia," he began, his voice a little shaky as he took her hands. "You walked into my life covered in rain and righteous indignation, and you washed away a world of cynicism I didn't even know I was drowning in. You are my chaotic, brilliant, and beautiful truth. I used to think the world was a series of transactions, but you taught me it's a series of connections, and the connection I have with you is the only one that truly matters. I promise to spend my life trying to be the man you and Winston already seem to think I am." The guests laughed, and a few wiped away tears. When it was her turn, Mia smiled through her own tears. "Julian," she said, her voice full of a love that was both fierce and gentle, "you were the most arrogant, infuriating, and impossible man I had ever met. You saw the world as a problem to be solved. But you let me show you that it's also a story to be loved. You learned to see the world not just with your head, but with your heart." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to fill our life with messy, wonderful adventures. I promise to always challenge you, to always make you laugh, and to always remind you that the best things in life are not assets to be owned, but strays to be rescued. And you," she finished, her voice a soft, loving whisper, "are the best stray I ever found." When they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause was joined by a chorus of happy barks from the nearby kennels, as if the entire sanctuary was celebrating with them. The reception was a joyful, chaotic party. The salsa band was a huge hit. The food was a delicious mix of gourmet catering and a taco truck that Mia had insisted on hiring. Julian's Aunt Penelope was last seen leading a conga line that included 3 investment bankers and a very happy-looking golden retriever. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the fields, Julian and Mia slipped away for a quiet moment. They walked to a small hill overlooking the sanctuary they had built together. "Happy, Mrs. Croft?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I'm not changing my name," she said with a grin. "Dr. Russo has a nice ring to it, and besides, I want the foundation to have my name. It's a statement." "I wouldn't have it any other way, Doctor," he said, kissing the top of her head. "So happy, Dr. Russo?" "Completely," she said, leaning back against his chest. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the lights of their new sanctuary begin to twinkle in the dusk. "You know," he said quietly, his voice full of a wonder that was still new to him. "It all started with a lost dog." "No," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "It started with a choice, the choice to stop and help." He looked at her, at the incredible, brilliant, compassionate woman who had completely rewired his heart. "You're right," he said. "It always starts with a choice." He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, contented kiss that tasted of promises kept and a beautiful, shared future. "And choosing you," he whispered against her lips, "was the best investment I ever made." Married life was not a quiet harbor for Julian and Mia. It was a bustling, joyfully chaotic port of call. Their home, a beautiful but unpretentious house they had bought in a neighborhood with actual trees and sidewalks, was a constant whirlwind of activity. It was filled with the sounds of Winston's happy barks, the serious, hushed consultations Mia would have with her ever-expanding network of rescued animals, and the low, rumbling laughter of Julian, a sound that had once been a rare commodity and was now the daily soundtrack of their lives. The Russo Foundation for Animal Welfare became their shared passion, a testament to their unique partnership. It was a force unlike any other in the world of philanthropy. Mia, as the founder and director, was the heart and soul of the operation. She traveled the country, identifying small, struggling clinics and shelters in underserved communities. She didn't just offer them money. She offered them a partnership, a blueprint for compassionate, sustainable care based on her own experiences at the Maple Street Clinic. She had an uncanny ability to walk into a room full of tired, cynical people, and within an hour have them believing in the possibility of a better world. Julian, true to his word, was her silent partner. He was the brilliant, strategic mind behind the scenes, the man who made her vision a reality. He handled the endowments, the legal structures, the complex logistics of building a national network from the ground up. He used his formidable reputation in the financial world not to intimidate, but to inspire. He would bring his old, stuffy colleagues to visit one of Mia's newly funded clinics, and he would watch with a quiet, profound satisfaction as they were completely won over, not by spreadsheets, but by the sight of a healthy puppy or the grateful smile of a low-income pet owner. They were a perfect team. He built the ship, she charted the course. Their life together was a beautiful dance of two worlds. He learned to appreciate the simple joy of a quiet Saturday spent volunteering at a local shelter, getting covered in mud and dog hair. He discovered that the most satisfying negotiations were not with hostile CEOs, but with a stubborn, three-legged cat who refused to take its medicine. She, in turn, learned to navigate his world with her own unique brand of chaotic grace. She would attend his formal business dinners and charm his associates, not by talking about stock prices, but by telling them hilarious and often heart-wrenching stories from her work with the foundation. She had a way of cutting through the corporate pretense and reminding them of the real human world that existed outside their boardrooms. "I don't know how you do it," he told her one night, after she had convinced a notoriously ruthless tech billionaire to fund a mobile spay and neuter clinic for an entire year. "You're the only person I know who can discuss veterinary ethics and venture capital in the same sentence." "It's all the same thing," she said with a shrug, snuggling next to him on the couch, Winston snoring softly at their feet. "It's about seeing a problem and finding a solution. Some problems just happen to be furrier than others." But their new, happy life was not without its echoes from the past. The final test of their partnership came a year after their wedding, from a direction neither of them expected. It started with a news alert on Julian's phone. A massive hurricane, one of the worst in a decade, was barreling towards the Gulf Coast, heading directly for the small coastal towns of Mississippi and Louisiana. It was a region that was still struggling to recover from previous storms, an area with a large, low-income population and severely underfunded public services. "The animal shelters there," Mia said, her face pale as she watched the news reports. "They're not equipped to handle this. They'll be overwhelmed. They'll have to—" She couldn't bring herself to say the word, euthanize. "Then we have to do something," Julian said, his response immediate and decisive. There was no hesitation, no calculation of the cost. He just saw a problem, and he knew they were the solution. For the next 24 hours, their home became a disaster relief command center. Julian was on the phone, using every bit of his logistical genius and his vast network of contacts. He chartered a private cargo plane. He arranged for a fleet of rental vans to be waiting on the ground. He coordinated with national relief organizations to get access to the disaster zone. Mia, in the meantime, was a whirlwind of compassionate action. She put out a call to the Russo Foundation's network of clinics and volunteers. The response was overwhelming. Vets, vet techs, and volunteers from all over the country offered to fly down and help. Donations of food, medicine, and crates poured in. 2 days later, Julian and Mia were on the ground in a small, devastated town in Mississippi. The scene was apocalyptic. The wind was still howling, the rain was relentless, and the local animal shelter was a scene of chaos and despair. The building was flooded, the power was out, and the small, overwhelmed staff was trying to care for over 200 terrified, abandoned animals. "We can't take any more," the shelter director, a tired, defeated-looking woman named Maria, told them, her voice breaking. "We have no space, no supplies. The state is telling us we have to make the hard choices." "No," Mia said, her voice ringing with an authority that cut through the chaos. "No one is making any hard choices today. We're here to help." For the next 3 days, they worked around the clock in the pouring rain and the howling wind. Julian, The man who had once been terrified of getting mud on his shoes was now wading through knee-deep, murky water, helping to reinforce the shelter's damaged roof. He used his business skills to set up a brutally efficient triage system, organizing volunteers and managing the dwindling supplies. Mia was the heart of the operation. She was a doctor, a comforter, a leader. She worked tirelessly, tending to injured animals, calming the terrified volunteers, and creating a sense of order and hope in the middle of a disaster. She slept for 2 hours a night on a cot in a makeshift tent, and she never once complained. They were a perfect, synchronized team, moving through the chaos with a shared, unspoken purpose. He was the logistics, she was the soul. On the third day, as the storm finally began to subside, the true scale of their operation became clear. The cargo plane Julian had chartered had arrived, filled with tons of donated supplies. The fleet of vans was being used to transport hundreds of animals from the overwhelmed local shelters to a temporary, large-scale emergency shelter they had set up in a vacant warehouse. The team of volunteer vets Mia had assembled was working in shifts, providing round-the-clock care. They had not just mitigated a disaster, they had performed a small miracle. That evening, as a weary but triumphant team of volunteers shared a simple meal of canned soup and crackers, the local news crew that had been covering the storm showed up. "Mr. Croft," the reporter said, her microphone in his face. "What is a billionaire investor from Chicago doing in the middle of a hurricane in Mississippi?" Julian looked at the camera. The old Julian would have given a polished, PR-approved statement about corporate responsibility. The new Julian just told the truth. "I'm here," he said, his arm wrapped firmly around Maya's shoulders, "because my wife is a hero, and my job is to be the support crew for the hero." He looked at Mia, and his eyes were full of a love and a pride so profound it was humbling. "She's the one who saw the need. She's the one who inspired the action. I handle the spreadsheets." The reporter then turned to Mia. "Dr. Russo, what you've all accomplished here is incredible. What's the secret?" Mia looked around at the tired, muddy but smiling faces of the volunteers. She looked at the rows of kennels filled with safe, warm, and cared-for animals, and she looked at her husband. "There's no secret," she said, her voice full of a quiet, powerful conviction. You see a problem, and you find a solution. You see a creature in need, and you help. And you never, ever give up. Because you never know," she said, her gaze meeting Julian's, "when the one you're rescuing might just end up rescuing you too." The story of the billionaire and the vet who had taken on a hurricane went national. They were hailed as heroes, as a new model for modern philanthropy. But for Julian and Mia, it was something much simpler. It was just who they were now. Partners. In love, in life, and in the messy, beautiful, and often chaotic business of making the world a slightly better place. On the flight home, sitting side by side on the cargo plane, surrounded by a few dozen of the most critical animal rescue cases, Mia fell asleep on Julian's shoulder. He looked at her, at the smudge of dirt still on her cheek, at the peaceful, exhausted expression on her face, and he felt a sense of contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. He had spent his life building a fortress of wealth, a defense against the chaos of the world. But she had taught him that the only true shelter from the storm was not in building walls, but in opening your arms. And in her arms, he had finally found his home. Life after the hurricane was a testament to the new world they had built together. The Russo Foundation for Animal Welfare, once a promising startup, was now a nationally recognized powerhouse of compassionate action. The Mississippi Miracle, as the media had dubbed their rescue operation, had catapulted them into the national spotlight. Donations poured in, and applications from talented, idealistic veterinarians and volunteers flooded their inbox. They were no longer just a foundation. They were a movement. Mia, as the reluctant but undeniable face of that movement, found herself in a world she had never imagined. She was invited to speak at conferences, to consult with national animal welfare organizations, to share her innovative model of community-based, compassionate care. She handled the attention with her trademark grace and a healthy dose of humor, often showing up to black-tie galas in her practical boots, a quiet but firm statement that she would not be changed by her new circumstances. Julian, in turn, found a new and profound purpose. He became the quiet, strategic force behind the foundation, a master architect of philanthropy. He discovered that the same skills he had used to dominate Wall Street, the ability to see patterns, to manage complex logistics, to build powerful networks, could be used to create a different kind of value. He was no longer just making money. He was making a difference, and he had never felt more successful. Their home life was a beautiful, chaotic, and joyful extension of their work. It became a temporary sanctuary for the most difficult rescue cases from the foundation. At any given time, their sprawling country house might be home to a litter of orphaned kittens, a three-legged dog learning to use a prosthetic, or a very grumpy parrot who had picked up a surprising number of financial terms from listening to Julian's conference calls. Their life was not a neat, orderly portfolio. It was a messy, wonderful, and constantly evolving story. 2 years after their wedding, on a crisp autumn afternoon, they were in the meadow behind their house. Mia was heavily pregnant with their first child, and they were trying, with comical ineptitude, to assemble a very complicated-looking baby crib. "The instructions clearly state," Julian said, frowning at a diagram that looked like an alien schematic, "that tab A is supposed to fit into slot B, but tab A is currently in what appears to be a completely different dimension from slot B." "Maybe you should try talking to it," Mia suggested, laughing as she watched him struggle. "You have to put some soul into it." He looked at her beautiful smiling face, her belly a perfect, round testament to their love, and he was overwhelmed by a wave of pure, unadulterated happiness. "You," he said, abandoning the crib and walking over to her, "are a terrible influence on my logical mind." "Good," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Your logical mind was boring." He kissed her, a long, sweet, and familiar kiss. "It was," he agreed. A few weeks later, their daughter, Eleanor Ellie Rosecroft, was born. She was a tiny, perfect miracle, with her mother's warm brown eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair that defied all attempts to be tamed. Julian held her in his arms, his heart cracking open in a way he never thought possible. This, he realized, was the ultimate, unconditional merger. The joining of two lives to create a new one. Life with Ellie was a new kind of beautiful chaos. It was sleepless nights and early morning cuddles. It was the joy of a first smile, a first laugh, a first wobbly step. It was Julian, the former Ice King of Chicago, discovering that his most important job was not being a CEO, but being a dad. He became an expert at making silly faces, at singing off-key lullabies, and at building magnificent towers of blocks just for the sheer joy of watching his daughter knock them down. Mia, in turn, found a new depth to her compassion. Motherhood softened her, strengthened her, and gave her a new perspective on the work she did. Every animal she saved, every family she helped, was now seen through the lens of the future she was building for her own daughter. When Ellie was 3 years old, they took her on her first official visit to the Maple Street Animal Clinic. The clinic had been completely rebuilt, funded by the foundation, and was now a state-of-the-art facility, but it had lost none of its original warmth or its heart. Carol, the receptionist, now happily semi-retired but still volunteering twice a week, greeted them with a huge hug. "Well, look at you," Carol said, beaming as she looked at Ellie. "A perfect combination of your mother's kindness and your father's stubborn chin." They walked through the clinic, a place that held so many pivotal memories for them. They saw the new X-ray machine, the bright, clean kennels, the waiting room that was now filled with comfortable chairs and a vibrant mural painted by local kids. Their last stop was the small, sunlit operating room where Mia had saved Patches the cat all those years ago. "This is where it all really started, isn't it?" Julian said quietly, his arm around Mia's shoulders as they watched Ellie curiously inspect a stethoscope. "No," Mia said, a soft, secret smile on her face. "It started before that." "The storm?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, it started a long time ago, on a bus stop bench, with a shivering, scared dog who needed help." She looked at him, her eyes full of a love that was as deep and as real as the life they had built. "It started with a choice, the choice to be kind." He understood. Their entire world, their love, their family, their foundation, it had all grown from a single, simple act of compassion in the middle of a storm. Later that evening, after they had tucked a tired but happy Ellie into bed, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. Winston, now an old, gray-muzzled, deeply contented dog, was asleep at their feet. "What are you thinking about?" Mia asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the gentle sounds of the country evening. "I was thinking about my mother's omelets," he said. "The omelets?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he said, a nostalgic smile on his face. "I was thinking that she would have loved you. She would have loved all of this." He looked around at their warm, messy, beautiful life. The chaos, the laughter, the dogs. She would have been so proud. "I think," Mia said softly, "that she already is." He pulled her closer, and they sat in a comfortable, contented silence. Their story was not a fairy tale of a princess being rescued by a prince. It was a real, messy, and far more beautiful story of a vet who rescued a dog, and in doing so, rescued the man who belonged to him. It was a story of two people who had found in each other not an escape from the world, but a partner with whom to face it, to heal it, and to build a new one together. It was a story that proved that the most powerful force in the universe was not money, or power, or logic, but a single, stubborn, and world-changing choice, the choice to be kind. And their life together was a testament to the fact that it was the only investment that truly mattered. We would like to say a special thank you to all of our new subscribers who have joined us recently. Your support helps us continue to create and share these stories. We are so grateful to have you in our Impressive Narratives family. What did you think of the story of Julian and Mia? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey of love and rescue? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for everyone who has stayed with us to the very end, who believes that a single act of kindness can change the world, please comment with the word sanctuary. We love knowing that you are part of our community. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will warm your heart.